Welcome back to Postwar with Ken Nishikawa. It's almost the 15th of August, VJ Day in the West, and Memorial Day for the end of the war and mourning for the war dead in Japan. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we also call it End of War Commemoration Day, or Shusen Kinenbi. As you might have noticed, I am a bit of a history geek, and like any self-respecting geek, I found one curious, recognizable pattern in Japanese modern history. One that I believe gives you a fairly profound insight into the Japanese psyche. This episode is called The 80-Year Karmic Cycle, How Japanese History Repeats Itself. And that's exactly what you get. No refund. Before I go any further, a small apology. I realized this is my second war-related episode in a row. It's that time of the year in Japan, so do pardon me, but I promise something entirely different next time. Possibly something with fewer casualties. Renowned writer Mishima once observed that the Japanese seem unable to bring about major, drastic change to their social structure without considerable pressure from outside. I happen to agree with him, actually. When you look at Japanese history, you'll find only 2 occasions on which the country truly rebuilt itself from scratch. The Meiji Restoration in 1868 and Japan's unconditional surrender to the Allies, well, mostly the Americans, in 1945. Treat those 2 years as the birth of New Japan or the rebirth of Japan, and rather fascinating parallel starts to emerge. So let's have a quick look at what happened and how the country transformed in each period. In 1868, after roughly 2.5 centuries of near total isolation, the iron gates of feudal Japan were violently thrown open. The fall of the Tokugawa shogunate and the restoration of imperial rule under Emperor Meiji marked the end of the samurai era. For Japan, 1868 wasn't simply a change of leadership. It was the rapid, breathless death of an ancient way of life. And rather than take that lying down, the nation, fearing colonization by the Western powers, chose a path of radical transformation instead. In a single generation, a closed agrarian feudal society dismantled its rigid caste system and remade itself into a highly industrialized global power. A quantum leap from the Middle Age into the modern world in a blink of an eye. Try doing that with a Japanese company's IT department today. Now, let's look at 1945. On the 15th of August that year, for the first time in history, the people of Japan heard the voice of their emperor. He announced the unthinkable: surrender. For Japan, 1945 wasn't simply the end of Second World War. It was the total collapse of an empire and the devastating reality of absolute defeat. A country that had never been defeated in over 2,600 years and had even seen off Kublai Khan's mighty Mongols twice, was, for the first time in its history, on its knees. And yet, out of the ashes, a profound transformation began again. The aggressive militarism that had defined the nation was dismantled entirely, replaced by a radical and lasting embrace of pacifism, guided by a new constitution, currently under some rather pointed scrutiny. Japan redefined itself as a democracy, prioritizing personal freedoms, human rights, and the equality of its citizens, women very much included. In fact, when it was first adopted, the new Japanese constitution was considered one of the most progressive feminist constitutions in the world. A story with a rather remarkable young woman behind it, which I'll save for another episode. 1945 was Japan's absolute rock bottom. But a fallen empire transformed itself into a modern global symbol of peace and innovation. Well, both of those, mind you, are looking a touch questionable at the moment, but that's the general narrative. The periods, beginning with those 2 symbolic years, each run roughly 80 years. From 1868 to 1945, that's 77 years. From 1945 to this year, 2026, that's 81 years. Let's call pre-war Japan the 80-year karmic cycle season 1, and post-war Japan the 80-year karmic cycle season 2. To show you why I think these are mirror images of one another, let's split each season into two 40-year blocks. I'm calling them the apprentice years and the hubris years. And you'll hear both terms twice because that repetition is rather the whole point. The apprentice years, the first 40 years of each season. Humble, eager to learn, hardworking, with a sizable cultural inferiority complex. The hubris years, the next 40 years. Confident, convinced we are the best, and sliding into a self-destructive conservatism. The rudder gets stiffer and stiffer. Season 1, The Apprentice Years, 1868 to 1908. Japan was desperate to become a modern nation, chiefly to avoid the fate of most of its neighbors, colonization by the Western powers. Industrialization and militarization were, therefore, the twin priorities. And when people say modernization, in Japan, or anywhere for that matter, what they actually mean is westernization. There was even a Meiji-era slogan for it. That's a new all. Leave Asia, enter Europe. The Japanese, in short, had a rather serious European complex. Anything European, especially the British because their empire ran the world at the time, was considered modern and, dare I say, cool. Japan militarized rather rapidly. It fought China in 1894 and won. Then it fought Russia in 1904. And, against all odds, won again, which made Japan the first Asian nation in modern times to defeat a European major power on the battlefield. 2 wars, 2 upsets. By 1908, 40 years after the Meiji Restoration began, Japan had achieved a staggering success. It was now a major world power and the only non-white nation admitted to that exclusive club. Season 1. The Hubris Years, 1908 to 1945. Season 1's Hubris Years open with the First World War. Japan fought on the Allied side. Another victory. By 1918, most people in Japan has probably arrived at the thought, well, there's really not much more we need to learn from the West. Now Japan was a nation brimming with confidence, backed by world-class industry and military might. Next item on the agenda. A spot of world domination, starting with liberating its Asian neighbors from the European imperialists. Freedom of speech and democracy were quietly strangled at home, in the name of consolidating government's power and bringing the nation together as one. Japan drifted into a war of attrition in China with no end in sight. The United States responded with a severe embargo, including oil, and demanded Japan withdraw from China and give up Manchuria. At the time, America was Japan's main oil supplier, and without American oil, all those handsome battleships and fighter planes were mostly just very expensive things for young boys to admire. The government ordered a simulation of a war against the US. In almost every conceivable scenario, Japan lost. Senior military officers dismissed this as nothing more than armchair theorizing. The Japanese spirit, they insisted, would prevail. It's the historical equivalent of ignoring the weather forecast because you fancy a picnic and somehow Japanese spirit will stop the rain from falling. The rudder now is firmly stuck. On that basis, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. And that's the end of the 80-year karmic cycle, Season 1. Season 2, The Apprentice Years, 1945 to 1985. Let's look at the 80-year karmic cycle, Season 2. The Apprentice Years begin in 1945. The Allied occupation's GHQ was, shall we say, enthusiastic in promoting the idea that there's no way like the American way. And the campaign was a resounding success, The place occupied by the British Empire in Europe in Season 1 was now filled quite comfortably by the US of A. Everyone in this country looked up to America. Jazz was a big thing, American TV drama, American music, anything American. Though to be fair, that sentiment wasn't unique to Japan. A great many people around the world felt the same way after the war. American goods became status symbols. American cars in particular were the thing to be seen in. Having abandoned the idea of being a major military power, Japan poured everything into becoming a major economic one instead. Through the 50s and 60s, Japanese factories turned out mostly cheap copies of American products. Though, being Japanese, they couldn't resist customizing and improvising them along the way, and also making them a tad bit more compact. Japanese people worked hard, hoping that one day, if not them, then their children or their grandchildren might enjoy something close to the comfort of an average American middle-class family. It seemed a very distant dream, though. Living standard did improve year by year, but up until well into the 1970s, most Japanese people still genuinely believed Japan was a poor country. I remember my granny used to say, whenever someone expressed a desire to buy something extravagant, they say, forget it, Japan is a poor country, or we're a poor nation, well into the 70s. Then, in 1975, the Group of Six, the G6, was formed, an exclusive club consisting of the US, UK, France, West Germany, Italy, and Japan, the only non-white member. By 1980, the once invincible American car industry found itself teetering on the edge of collapse, undercut by cheap, reliable, fuel-efficient Japanese cars, helped along nicely by the oil crisis. By the end of Season 2's Apprentice Years, 1985, exactly 40 years after the war's end, the Plaza Accord was signed, an agreement that catapulted Japanese economy to unprecedented heights and, in the same stroke, planted the seeds of the greatest economic collapse in modern history. Rarely has one signature done so much heavy lifting. Season 2, The Hubris Years, 1985 to 2026. Present. Season 2's Hubris Years begin with Japan seemingly on course to become the world's strongest economy. I touched on this in an earlier episode, when London was cool and Turkey was rich. So if the theme tickles your interest, check it out. But the numbers bear repeating. At one point, you could, on paper at least, sell the grounds of the Imperial Palace and buy the entire state of California outright. The yen was that strong. The Tokyo Stock Exchange's trading value outstripped Wall Street's. Some economists genuinely predicted Japan's total GDP would overtake America's by the end of the 20th century. By 1989, most Japanese in Japan had probably arrived at the thought, well, there's really not much more we need to learn from the West. Déjà vu. Now, Japan was a nation brimming with confidence, backed by the world's strongest currency and booming economy. Next item on the agenda, a spot of world domination. This time via the rather more genteel method of buying things. Sony bought Columbia Pictures, and Mitsubishi bought Rockefeller Center. Japanese firms went shopping for trophy assets around the globe. While Japan was busy buying up Manhattan, its competitive edge was quietly slipping away thanks to strong yen. Then, the bubble burst. The shock didn't reach everyday life straight away, well, unless you're an investor, especially heavily investing in real estate. Then you're practically screwed. But for most of us, working class, the impact was not felt immediately. The economy had already begun its long, steady slide into irrelevance. But people remained blissfully confident. Japan does things properly after all. The best products, the best food, the best everything. In the meantime, again, the rudder gets stiffer and stiffer. Up until maybe the 90s, billboards and train adverts in Japan were full of the stereotypical Western models. blonde, blue-eyed, selling everything from cosmetic to fridges. Probably another projection of American idealization. Today, you'll hardly spot a Western face on a train advert, unless it's selling an English conversation school. Now, I am not saying we should be worshipping Westerners, especially white people. On the contrary, I think it's good to be comfortable with one's own identity without feeling inferior to anyone. But I still believe this is quite symbolic. So, there you are, 2 80-year cycles, Season 1 and Season 2, each running the exact same course. Apprentice years first, humble and eager to learn, followed by hubris years, arrogance dressed up as confidence, and finally a slow, destructive decline with the nation's rudder firmly stuck, and yet adamantly refusing to admit it. Both almost exactly 40 years. When I was in London working for the BBC in the 90s, I had a friend, a colleague at the BBC. He was a university professor who once told me that the Japanese do their best work when chasing someone they respect. Once we reach the top, apparently we stop performing. There's a teaching in Japanese Buddhism for this, Tariki Hongan, other power as opposed to self-power. It's somewhat similar to the Protestant idea of salvation through faith and divine grace alone. You cannot earn your way to heaven through good deeds alone. You need help from outside. Without a role model nation it can genuinely respect and admire, the theory goes, or my theory goes, or his theory goes, Japan struggles to achieve the impossible on its own. And as I mentioned regarding Mishima at the start of this episode, the Japanese seem unable to bring about major structural change that it desperately needs without pressure from outside. The first push came from the Western imperial powers. The second came from total defeat at the hands of the United States. Now the question is, do I think Japan today needs an other power of that kind? Possibly. It doesn't necessarily have to be an invasion as such. Just something quite powerful, though, to jolt it out of this downward spiral. I would love to believe Japan is able to change from within, but in all honesty, I just don't see it happening. Almost 40 long, grueling years of economic stagnation, or dare I say, contraction, and the government has stuck stubbornly to more or less the same tried and failed financial playbook throughout. Even more remarkably, the Japanese people keep voting for them in landslide numbers. This is what I'd call self-destructive conservatism, and Japan's history repeating itself. This episode is more food for thought than a definitive historical theory as such, but I did think these 2 parallel 80-year trajectories, before and after the war, were worth laying out to view the Japanese psyche from a different angle. On that note, this has been Postwar Japan. I'm taking next week off for Obon, Japan's traditional holiday season, and also because I'm rather busy with other work to live. But making this show is what I live for. So as soon as it's self-sustaining, I'll put even more time and effort into it. If you'd like to join me on this ridiculous ride, please like and subscribe. I'm Ken Nishikawa. Until next time, stay safe.